Ani Maamin ve'emuna shalema bevias HaMashiach. I believe with a complete faith in the coming of Mashiach, and though he may tarry, still I long for him every day. It's a song of incredible longing for the Messiah to come to end the pain and the suffering, the bloodshed, and bring us into the Messianic age. It is the 12th principle of Maimonides' 13 principles of the Jewish faith. I believe with a perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach. And that song, that melody to those words, it's an unbelievable story that I'm going to share with you in just a couple of minutes. Let's light up the darkness. Singing it, by the way, that was the great Moti Steinmetz, who is with us as we do a little learning on a Wednesday evening across the nation and across the continents. Gail in Virginia, Melissa in Great Neck, Stephen in New Hampshire, Pauline in Arkansas, Crystal in Canada, John in Sedona, Judy in Oregon, Bill in Arkansas, Harold says shalom, Christo in Lubbock, Renee in Indy, Paula in Chicago, Marjorie in Georgia, Lucy in Minnesota, Ann in Merced, California. Patrice loves Moti Steinmetz. Bill says, well, that's a tune I haven't heard in a dog's age. Fred, greetings from Miami Beach. Paula in Oregon. Moishe Hernandez, shalom desde Bogotá in Colombia. Patrice is in Utah. Sandy's in Michigan. Wait, no, it's different than I thought it was, says Bill. Renee knows Ani Maamin. Paula says shalom. Steve in Tallahassee. Fred says amen. Jill says shalom from Newport. Emerald in Oklahoma, Mila in Indiana, Michael in Scranton, Allison in Great Neck, Janice in Dallas. And over there on the YouTube side, Lindsay knows this story. She says it's incredible. Neil in Virginia. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be learning with you. That song, it's not that it's particularly related to what we're learning on today's daf in the Talmud, but Nina and I were talking about it and listening to it last night. It's just so moving. I don't know. I just wanted to share it with you. So that story, it really is amazing. What happened was there was a fellow named Reb Azriel David Fastag. He was an older man as at the time of World War II. In the 30s, as the Nazi menace was growing and eventually, endangering all the Jews of Europe, and particularly in Poland, some people just didn't make it out in time. The I'm not sure how to even pronounce it, the Mojitzer Rebbe waited a long time to get out, but got out. His Hasidim, his followers of the Mojitzer Rebbe, got him out of Europe. That's an amazing story itself. They got him out of Poland. He actually went east through Russia. Like the students and teachers of the Mir Yeshiva, they went all the way across Russia and ended up in Shanghai in China. There was a Jewish community that got established during the Holocaust in Shanghai. Eventually, they made the Mir Yeshiva people made their way to Jerusalem. The Mojitzer Rebbe made it eventually to San Francisco, and that's where he was during the war. He reached there in 1940. But tragically, many of his followers did not get out of Poland in time. There was a train, a Nazi train, taking Jews to their death. Not to Auschwitz, but to perhaps even a worse place, Treblinka, which was not a concentration camp. It was purely a death camp. It was just you went there to die. The Jews on the cattle cars, couldn't have known exactly where they were going, but they knew it was terrible. They knew it was bad. And by the time this story happened, I think a lot of them did know that it was bad. They were probably going to die. The cattle cars were rolling across, Europe on their way to Treblinka. People crowded. And this man, Reb Azriel David Fastag, started looking back. He was a very dedicated disciple of the Mojitzer Rebbe. But he himself, although he basically made his living running a small shop, what he was really known for in the Hasidic world was his singing. And not only singing, but melodies that he wrote, nigunim, tunes that he wrote. And as these people, the train cars were rolling to the death camp, and people were moaning and crying and lamenting and, just terrified, and many of them figuring they were going to die, his mind just went to being alongside his Rebbe. And when was he closest to his Rebbe? It was actually at high holiday services. Rabbi Azriel was often next to the Mojitzer Rebbe at Rosh Hashanah and at Yom Kippur as the Rebbe was leading services for a huge congregation, the Mojitzer Hasidim, occupying a very large synagogue at high holidays. And Reb Azriel had written many of the melodies that the Mojitzer Hasidim were using, that the Rebbe loved him for these melodies that he brought. And as that railroad car was rolling, he was thinking about being next to his Rebbe, and somehow what came into his mind were these words, right? These words in the midst of the bleakest, darkest, most terrifying moment in their lives, these people rolling toward a death camp. This man, Reb Azriel, was thinking about his Rebbe, and into his mind came the words of Rambam, of Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, and the 12th one is, I believe with a perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach, meaning I believe in salvation. Right? I believe in our salvation. If not in this world, then in the world to come. And though it may tarry, and though it may look like it's never coming, I long for it every day because I know it will come. He's thinking about those words, and a melody took shape in his mind. And he was just lost in his own world, and he started singing that song. Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin. I believe, V'emunah Shalema, with a perfect faith, Bevias HaMashiach, in the coming of Mashiach. The melody took shape, and he started singing it, and he just started singing it over and over like in a trance in the middle of this crowded cattle car. And what he didn't know was that it gradually, all the moaning and crying subsided, and people were listening to him. It became completely silent, and they were listening to him sing. And then they started joining in the song. And everyone in that train car was singing this song along with Reb Azriel. And the singing was heard not only in his train car, but it spread to the next train car and the next. And that entire train was singing this moving song of hope and redemption, that in the blackest moments, we know there's a light that will come, a light that will dawn for us. The whole train sang it endlessly for such a long time. Eventually, it ended, it all died down, and it fell back to silence. And while the singing was going on, Reb Azriel realized what had happened, that all these people were singing it, singing the song that had just appeared in his mind. It just came to him. And when it all died down, he said, I will give half my portion in Olam Haba, in the world to come, to anyone who can bring this song to the Modzitzer Rebbe. They're on their way to a death camp. How is anyone going to bring this song to the Modzitzer Rebbe? As we talked about yesterday, when a task appears before you and you realize it's your task, it has only appeared there because there's some way for you to do it. So it was not for everybody in that train. But two men said, no, that task is for me. They said, we will get that song to the Modzitzer Rebbe. This is a train car rolling through the night on its way to a death camp. How are they going to do it? But they had to do it. They said, we will get that song to the Modzitzer Rebbe. One climbed on the shoulders of the other. They started probing the roof of the cattle car. He found a board that was old and loose, and he was able to knock it out, and the board next to it, and the board next to that. The two men climbed on top of the train car as it's rolling through the night. Now they had to jump off it. The first man jumped off and was killed. The second man saw that, but he was determined to fulfill this mission. He realized it was for him alone. He jumped off that train at speed and survived the jump. And somehow he made it through the countryside of Poland during the Holocaust, and he escaped. And he made his way to the Holy Land, right? What was then called British Palestine. And he delivered that song. They think that the way he did it is he found the Rebbe's son who was then in the Holy Land. And then together they brought that song to the Modzitzer Rebbe in San Francisco. It eventually reached him. Let me read to you what it said about the Rebbe receiving that song. Hold on, let me just get this in front of me. It is told that on the first Yom Kippur, that the Modzitzer Rebbe sang Reb Azriel's song, Ani Maamin. There were thousands of Jews in the synagogue. The entire congregation burst into tears, which fell like water into the pool of tears and blood of the Jewish people. And the tune soon spread throughout the Jews of the entire world. With this nigun, with this melody, said the Modzitzer Rebbe, the Jewish people went to the gas chambers. And with this nigun, the Jews will march to greet Mashiach. What a song. What a story. Okay, let's proceed. Today's episode of Accidental Talmud is Daily is sponsored by Avi Peretz, our dear friend, in honor of Sal and Nina. Thank you, Avi. May you and Wanda and Emma and your entire family, all your loved ones, be showered in blessings, nothing but goodness all the days of your life. And we say Amen. All right. We are opening a new chapter. Tonight we're beginning chapter 7 of Tractate Pesachim, the laws of Passover. We're on Daf Ayin Dalet, page 74. Chapter 7 is going to really be, we've been talking so much about the Korban Pesach, about the Passover offering that is slaughtered when the temple is standing only, of course. But we've been talking about when it's brought and how it's brought and the blood and how it's received and the priests and what if somebody slaughters it and there's no one to eat it, etc. Or the people who are going to eat it become tameh, etc. Okay, so now we're going to actually talk about cooking it. We're getting to eating it, but right now we're going to talk about cooking it. So when the temple was standing and the people registered, a group of people got together and they brought their Paschal lamb to Jerusalem, to the temple courtyard, and it was slaughtered there, and it was slaughtered properly, and the animal remained qualified. A bit of its blood was caught by the priest and sprinkled on the altar, and now it's time to cook it, right? If it's on Shabbos, they're going to wait until Shabbos ends to do the roasting. Do it Saturday night. Any other day of the week, they can start cooking it in the afternoon before Passover actually starts, so they can have a relatively early dinner. Now, the main laws of that the Torah specifies is that the Passover lamb or young goat must not be cooked or boiled. It can only be roasted. It must be roasted whole. Now, that's what it says. Of course, the sages are going to look very closely at this law and the actual manner of preparing the lamb so that it is truly roasted over the fire and that it is not even a little bit cooked or boiled, which seems like, well, either they're roasting it or they're cooking it or they're boiling it. It doesn't seem that confusing, but as we'll see, it's not so simple. So with regard to roasting the lamb, what precisely is considered roasting and how is that different from cooking? Is there a specific method that must be used or are there alternatives? We also learn that an individual who is tameh may not partake of the Paschal lamb, and instead his fulfillment of this mitzvah is postponed until Pesach Sheni, the second Passover a month later. This is true unless the majority of the Jewish people are ritually impure, in which case there is a special dispensation and the Paschal lamb may be brought despite the impurity. It remains to be clarified, though, which categories of ritual impurity will trigger having to wait for the second Passover. So those are some of the subjects we'll be covering in this chapter 7, but we begin with the first Mishna of chapter 7. Let me just arrange my desk a little better here. Okay. All right. So, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 7. How does one roast the Paschal lamb? One brings a spit of wood, in this case of wood and not metal, as we'll see. One brings a spit of pomegranate wood and thrusts it into the mouth of the lamb until it reaches its rear end, and one then puts its legs and entrails inside it and roasts it all together. This is the statement of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili. Rabbi Akiva says one does not insert its legs and entrails inside it, as this would be a type of cooking for those parts of the lamb. Right? So if you take a whole lamb and you have to roast it, but the manner of roasting, right, a spit that's going to be rotating over the fire, if the legs are hanging down, they're going to be too close to the fire. So they remove the legs, but then what do they do with the legs? If they put them inside this lamb that's being roasted, they already cut it open to remove the innards, because those needed to be cleaned, as we already read, that they clean the intestines. So then if you inserted the legs inside the lamb to cook it as it was roasting inside, well, the outside of the lamb would be roasted, but these pieces of meat that would be inside the lamb would actually be getting cooked as if the lamb itself was a cooking pot, right? So that's why Rabbi Akiva says, no, you have to attach the legs and any of the innards that you remove from actually inside the lamb, attach it near the head of the lamb, so they also are being roasted over the fire. They take this command in the Torah that it must be roasted over fire very seriously. Anything placed inside the offering does not get roasted directly by the fire and is considered to have been cooked. Rather, one suspends the legs and entrails from the spit above the animal's head outside it. One may not roast the Paschal lamb on a metal spit nor on a metal grill. However, Rabbi Tzadok says there was an incident with Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi, who said to his slave Tavi, "Go and roast the Paschal lamb for us on the grill." Right? So they're saying that the ideal way is to do it on a spit. They're saying that it can't be a metal spit, and we're going to discuss why momentarily. It should be a wood spit. And then, well, what, could you just put it on a grill? I mean, I'm the burger guy around this house. I grill burgers all the time. They're definitely getting cooked by the fire that is underneath them. Can you use a metal grill? There's going to be some dispute about that, and we'll come back to it momentarily. Now, the Gemara. And tonight's there's a lot of technicalities on this opening daf of this chapter, so we're not going to do so much of it. So if you've got questions, get them in now. It's actually going to be a relatively short class. Okay, the Gemara suggests, let them bring a metal spit. The Gemara answers, with regard to a metal utensil, once part of it is hot, it is all hot, and therefore the meat is roasted due to the heat of the spit. Right, so the concept here is if you use a metal spit, right? Like, so if you've been to, many years ago, I was in Africa, and this was before I was eating kosher. I was in Africa, and there was a restaurant in Nairobi, in Kenya, called the Carnivore, right, where they would bring meat from all these different animals that you see out there on the grasslands in Kenya. And you could taste it, right? So you could taste wildebeest and zebra and various kinds of gazelle and antelope and eland and water buffalo, etc., even crocodile. But all the different kinds of meat were being cooked on a spit, right? So there literally was it was almost like a sword, but it was just a metal pole with a handle that went through the meat, and that's how it was cooked. And then they removed it from the fire, and the waiters would walk around with the spit, with the meat on it. And if you wanted some, they would just put the spit on this iron plate that was in front of you and cut off a piece of that meat and move on. Okay, so I wouldn't go there now. It's definitely not kosher. But you could so you got that picture of meat on a spit. But here's the issue: if the spit, right, it's got the meat over the fire. And often it's rotating, right? It could be like rotating over the fire, or it's just placed over the fire. Either way, the issue is if it's a metal spit, well, the metal that's outside the piece of meat is going to get very hot, right? Because the fire is going to heat up the metal directly. Of course, metal conducts heat. So what's going to happen is the piece of meat is going to be getting heat from the fire that's beneath it, but it's also going to be getting heat from the metal pole that goes through it. The metal gets super hot. It conducts some of that heat into the inside the meat, right, where the metal pole passes through the meat. And so it will be adding heat from the inside. And that would not be roasting over a fire. The part of the meat that therefore it got cooked by touching this very hot spit of metal that meat would be cooked in a different manner than the outer meat, which is directly being roasted over the fire. And that's why they want the spit to be made out of wood rather than metal, so that it won't conduct heat inside and cook the inside of the meat, in this case the Paschal lamb or goat. As they say, with regard to metal, once part of it is hot, it is all hot, and the meat is roasted due to the heat of the spit itself. And the Merciful One states in the Torah that the Paschal lamb must be roasted in fire and not roasted through something else. The Gemara asks why it is necessary to use specifically a spit of pomegranate wood. Okay, we have to use wood. Why pomegranate wood? Let them bring a spit of palm tree wood. The Gemara answers, since the palm branch has grooves between the leaves, it gives off a small amount of water from the grooves during roasting. The meat of the offering that touches the spit is as though it is cooked, right? So if you use a kind of wood that is not, dried out enough, or that is not dense enough so that it gives up its water, so then the part of the meat that is around that wood, which is actually, steam is coming out of it, right? Hot water is emerging from the wood. So again, the part that is touching the wood is not being roasted from the fire outside the meat. It would be getting cooked by the steam coming off the wood. The palm branch would definitely give off that kind of steam, and therefore the sages disqualify it as the material for the wooden spit. Says the Gemara, okay, so let them bring a spit of wood from the fig tree. The Gemara answers, since it is hollow and it has sap inside, it gives off water, and it is as though the meat is cooked. The Gemara suggests, let them bring a spit from an oak tree, or from a carob tree, or from a sycamore tree, which are hardwoods and do not have sap. The Gemara answers, with regard to each one of these trees, since it has knots and one must cut them off in order to smooth the branch, it gives off water from the locations of the cuts during the roasting, and then the meat would be considered cooked rather than roasted by the fire. Let me make an adjustment here. The Gemara asks, a branch from a pomegranate tree also has knots. The Gemara answers, its knots are smooth. They don't need to be cut off in order to stick the wooden branch through the lamb. There is no need to straighten the branch with a knife in order to use it, and therefore it does not emit water. And if you wish, say that the Mishna is referring to a branch within its first year, which does not yet even have knots. The Gemara asks, but there is the place where it was cut from the tree, and water will come from there. The Gemara answers, one leaves the place where it was cut outside the animal rather than inserting that side of the branch into the animal. The Gemara notes that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, as it was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says, just as the part of a spit of wood that is inside the animal is not burned, although it is over the fire, so the part of a spit of metal that is inside the animal does not become burning hot. There is no concern that the meat will be roasted from the heat of the spit. The rabbis said to him, this is not the case. The rabbis are saying to Rabbi Yehuda, you must have fallen asleep in physics class, and you didn't catch that teaching when our physics professor said, metal conducts heat. If you heat up the metal that's on either side of the meat, the metal inside the meat is going to get super hot. It's not going to be insulated by the meat that's around it and therefore not get so hot. Rather, it's going to conduct the heat from the exposed parts of the metal spit. With regard to this, the metal, when part of it is hot, it is all hot. And with regard to that, the wood, when part of it is hot, not all of it is hot. And therefore, the meat is cooked by the heat of the fire and not by the heat of the spit. So Rabbi Yehuda, sorry, say his colleagues, we don't use a metal spit. We only use a wooden spit when we're cooking the Paschal lamb. The sages taught, which is the kid, right? The kid meaning a young goat, roasted whole, that is prohibited to eat on the nights of Passover in modern times, right? Isn't that beautiful? Now they're saying modern times. They're writing nearly 2,000 years ago, right? But not 2,000 years ago. The temple fell in about either the year 69 or the year 70 of the Common Era. And now these are going to be the Amoraim, the sages of the Talmud, who are commenting on the teachings of the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna. So when they're talking about modern times, they're saying after the temple fell, and maybe in the year 200 or 300 or 400, sometime before the year 500. Now think about it. I mean, America is approaching 250 years old. The rabbis of the Talmud were already talking about modern times. It could be 300-400 years later than the destruction of the temple. Once the temple was destroyed, we no longer could bring the Paschal lamb. Once we couldn't bring the Paschal lamb, now in most communities we have a tradition we don't eat lamb at all on Passover. In some communities they will. But what we could never do in all the time since the temple was destroyed is take a lamb or a goat, a young goat, and roast it whole, because that manner of preparing it was only for the Paschal lamb when it was brought to the temple in Jerusalem. And once the temple was destroyed, couldn't do that anymore. So some communities kept eating lamb, but they would be very careful not to roast the lamb whole the way that it had been roasted when we could bring the offering in Jerusalem. So which is the kid that's roasted whole that is prohibited to eat on the nights of Passover? And why the nights of Passover? Because outside of Israel, 2 nights of Passover, right? We have 2 Seders. We celebrate the festival of Passover, meaning the first day of Passover. Outside the Holy Land, that's always a 2-day holiday instead of a 1-day holiday. We've talked about that before. Okay, where am I? So as not to appear. Why? So as not to appear as though one was sacrificing the Paschal lamb outside the temple. So which is the one that's prohibited? It is any kid that one roasted all at once in the manner that the Paschal lamb was roasted. However, if one of its limbs is severed or one of its limbs is boiled, it is no longer considered a kid roasted whole. So people were flying a little bit close to the edge, as it were. They were roasting a whole lamb, but just to distinguish between the lamb as it was done in Jerusalem and the way they were doing it in these other communities. We read some time ago, a few weeks ago, that they did this in Rome, right? And the Jewish community in Rome was doing this. They were roasting a lamb, but they would make these distinctions, right? They would sever the limb. Well, the limbs were already severed. We saw that. But what they would do is they would sever the limb and they would boil it, cook it a different way, right? Or not. They would make various distinctions so it was clear to anyone who was attending that it wasn't being done in the same way that it had been done in the temple, because all they were doing was cooking a lamb, right? They're saying, okay, we've always eaten lamb for Passover, we're going to keep eating lamb for Passover. But what they're not doing is bringing the Passover offering. And because that distinction started to become a little bit subtle, eventually in most communities they said, that's it. We're not going to eat lamb on Passover. We'll eat something else. Okay, there was just one little other thing that I wanted to read. The sages will discuss in the course of this discussion how they ensure that the meat that they're roasting, now that they're talking about roasting meat in order to eat it, they're going to ensure that any meat which Jews are going to eat isn't going to have any kind of a collection of blood in it, right? Because it is absolutely prohibited in the Torah to eat the blood. Now, generally, when the Torah says you shall not eat the blood, what the Torah means, how the sages have interpreted it, is the lifeblood. The lifeblood is when you make a kosher slaughter of an animal, right? You sever its jugular and windpipe, and then it's that first gush of blood that comes out, and with which the soul of the animal leaves its body, right? It's the lifeblood, the blood that, as it drains out, the animal loses its life. And then, like any kind of remaining blood, we're not going to be so worried about. We're always going to drain out the blood, and we're going to salt the animal to make sure. I mean, Jews are very, very careful not to eat blood in any form. Really what it means is the lifeblood. I mean, it's not like you're going to make the meat so dry that it's going to be, icky to eat because you're so worried about getting every last drop of blood out of it. I mean, you're eating meat, so there's going to be some amount of blood in it. But when there's a chance that some blood will collect in one area of the animal, okay, so then they're going to be extra careful to make sure that Jews aren't coming to eat blood in any form. So the Gemara explains, with regard to this piece of raw meat that became red from the blood inside it, right? So you can imagine there was there was a chunk of raw meat that was waiting to be cooked, and it was resting somewhere for a while. So gravity will pull the blood that's within that piece of meat down, and there's going to be a piece of the animal that would, it's more red than the rest of the meat because some of the blood has collected there. Okay, so with regard to that piece of raw meat that became red because of the blood inside it, if one cut it and salted it, it is permitted even to cook them in a pot because it is clear that the salt removes the blood from the meat. But if one put it on a spit in order to roast, and if one put it on a spit in order to roast it, then it is permitted because the blood flows out. With regard to a case where one placed it on coals, Rav Acha and Ravina disagreed about the law in this case. One prohibited and one permitted it. The one who prohibited reasoned that the coals caused the meat to shrivel and harden, trapping the blood inside, and the one who permitted it reasoned that the heat of the coals draws out the blood, leaving only the meat. And the law on that question, this is the last thing I'm going to cover, and then we're going to go to your questions. Raw meat that became red, the law is, if an animal suffered a wound that resulted in a visible hematoma, it is prohibited to cook that section of the meat until it is cut open and salted well. right? So you've done everything else correctly. You made sure that the animal was, slaughtered in a kosher manner. The blood was drained out of it. But because the animal might have had some kind of a bruise where some of its own blood collected in that area, so then you have to take additional steps to make sure that there was not any kind of concentration of blood that a Jew might come to eat, because it's so prohibited to eat the blood. So you have to cut out that part and salt it. The salt brings out the blood. Then you rinse off the salt and throw that out, of course. And however, it is permitted to roast it over a fire, even if one does not cut and salt it. And this is in accordance with the explanations of Rabbeinu Gershom and the Rosh, meaning that roasting will draw the blood out of the meat. In the same way that when you're grilling hamburgers, you can see, right, that this kind of the blood rises to the top and eventually just gets seared off the meat. So you really don't have to worry that you might come to be consuming blood. Okay. Right. Okay. So tomorrow we'll be addressing the question of, what about a grill? Aren't we roasting over fire when meat is cooked on a grill? We'll get to that tomorrow. All right, let's see your questions and comments. Lindsay, this song is always in my head. I guess referring to Ani Maamin. It's such a beautiful song. And thank you for sharing that. Lindsay in Cincinnati, Ohio. Sharon says, is it known to us now how the lamb was roasted in Egypt prior to the Exodus? Wouldn't that be the way it should be roasted? It doesn't seem likely that they used a spit. Well, I'm not sure about that. I think that a spit is really it's the simplest thing. Like when you imagine, just people camping, right? What are they doing? They just build a fire, right? Put the meat on a stick and hold it over the fire. Maybe they put 2 branches in the ground on either side. They hung the third branch between them, right? 2 branches with a little, fork in the branch at the top, a little division, right? And then the branch used as a spit through the meat above it. And then you could even rotate that from the side. I mean, I think that's like the most rudimentary way to cook. Now you might say, well, no, Sal, maybe they just cooked it inside in their house, right? They weren't making some kind of a campfire. So I don't know. It seems to me that the Torah was obviously given after we left Egypt. They definitely, they slaughtered a lamb. We know that because they used its blood on the doorposts of the house to mark the Jewish homes so that the angel of death would pass over during the 10th plague, right? The slaying of the firstborn of the Egyptians. So the lamb was slaughtered. It was eaten. I guess we don't really know. I haven't seen it yet in the research if they were cooking it on a wood spit there. Did that rule go out? Did God tell Moses, when spreading the word that you'll have a lamb this night, that it should be roasted over fire? I'm not sure about that, but it's a good question, Sharon. Okay, that seems to be the only questions that Nina's passing over to me now. So that's what I've got for us this evening. I hope you'll remember this story of that song of Ani Maamin. Just imagine, all those Jews on their way to a death camp singing, I believe with a perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach, in the coming of our salvation, and maybe late, but I long for it every day. I know that it's coming, if not in this world, then in the next. If they could hold on to hope in that kind of blackness, how much more can we hold on to hope whenever we're dealing with in our lives? All the best, my holy sisters and brothers. Have a great night, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific on Thursday. We'll be doing with God's help, page 75. There are 121 pages in this tractate. We're on page 75, so we're working our way, right? About 45 pages to go and to finish tractate Pesachim, and then we'll be pretty close to Passover, right? So we'll be completing our journey through the laws of Passover just shortly before Passover comes. And then the next tractate would be Shekalim. But we're in chapter 7 of 10 chapters, page 75 tomorrow of 121 pages. Have a great evening. Look